I'm Charlotte, and you are watching The Ugly Atheist. Today's topic, before we get into today's topic, I wanted to make a note for the viewer. I know that I speak rather slowly as I'm not working off of a script. I'm sort of thinking through things as I'm speaking, and that results in a rather slow pace to my videos. So I would recommend when watching my videos that you put the speed to 1.5 at least, and that'll help things go much more smoothly and shorten your suffering. With that being said, let's get into today's topic. So sometimes when I'm driving and I'm not blasting music, I am thinking about stuff, as we all tend to do when we have that kind of downtime on a long commute and we are alone with our thoughts. So a few years ago, I was thinking about the wide spectrum of human emotions, and it seems to me that a lot of the emotions are related. And that made me think in terms of a structure of emotions that sort of resembles a family tree, where certain emotions are connected to others, and if you move farther down the tree, you have other more fundamental emotions, and then further down yet, you have even more fundamental emotions. And that train of thought led me to think that there must be one single emotion that is the source of all the other emotions that come up the family tree and that branch out. So I put together a rudimentary map of what the family tree might be. And I started with sort of a universal emotion. I started with frustration. Now, frustration, I would define it as having an ideal in your head of how a situation should go or play out, how your life should go, or how a relationship is supposed to go. And the frustration comes in where you're trying to map your ideal onto reality, and there are incongruencies, and there's all this potential for things to go wrong, so it kind of frustrates you. So then, branching upward on the tree from frustration, and I'm going to put this up on the screen for you to follow along. And I also want to say, before we continue with this, is that these connections and associations between these emotions are more or less my opinion of how it should be structured. I'm sure if any of you decided to give this any additional thought on your own, you might come up with different associations. So definitely take this with a grain of salt. So starting with frustration, we have the first emotions that kind of branch out from it we have anxiety and worry. Anxiety and worry come from, I would say, specific instances of failing to meet your ideal. So let's say, you're already frustrated because your ideal is not necessarily meeting up with the real, and you can see where there's some potential problems. And then if one of those problems comes into reality, then that becomes an anxiety and a worry. So to put it more concretely, let's say you are in a new relationship and you have this idea in your head of how a relationship is supposed to go and what your role is and what you're supposed to be doing and how you're supposed to respond when the person your partner doesn't do what they're supposed to do. And so you're frustrated, and then let's say you say something wrong or you do something wrong. So that is a specific incident where the ideal and the real clashed in a very tangible way. So that results in anxiety and worry. You're anxious because you don't know how that person's going to respond. Are they going to hate you? Are they going to forgive you? Or whatever the situation is. But you have anxiety and the worry that goes along with that. So anxiety and worry branch away from frustration. Frustration is the root in that scenario. You also have sadness and grief and regret. This is also branched out from the frustration of your ideal not meeting the real. But there's another set of emotions that stem from frustration. And we have, higher up the tree, we have anger. Anger is when the frustration gets too intense. You are short-tempered and your frustration starts to show. I think that's the anger is when you're frustrated, is kind of the showing, the display of your frustration. And from that, we have hate and envy, which come from anger. Anger is the root of hate and envy, and frustration is the root of anger. And so we have envy is when, so you have this ideal, going back to that again, of what your life needs to be like, and you see that it doesn't meet the real. So that makes you angry. But then when you see somebody whose life is the way that you want yours to be, that's when envy comes in. So envy and hate, and then you start to possibly hate that person because they are fulfilling the life that you wish you had, or they're in the relationship that you wish you had, or they have the dream job that you wish you had, and it seems perhaps effortless to them, or something along those lines. This is sort of, and we're dealing here with the frustration as the root. These are very negative emotions. These are very potentially destructive emotions. I mean, they can be constructive if you are envious of someone, for example, but then you use that energy from the envy to improve yourself and make yourself more marketable, more skilled, that sort of thing. So it has a potential to go both ways. Most of the time it goes negatively, but you can turn it into a positive. So, but I'm thinking that frustration, while it's a fundamental emotion, I think we can go even farther back towards the root of this tree. And we have, of course, all the positive emotions like love, empathy, sympathy, compassion. But those all have a root. My thinking is that there's got to be a single, as I mentioned earlier, there's got to be a single emotion that is the foundation for the spectrum of all the other emotions, good or bad. And so, and I added this caveat. I said this fundamental emotion, this root, has to be ubiquitous. It has to be across all species, all life forms, from a single-celled organism all the way to elephants or whatever. And the only thing I've found that I discovered that could meet that criteria and meet that requirement is fear, and specifically fear of death. So how can all of these amazing and beautiful and complex emotions stem from nothing more than the fear of death? Not that the fear of death is anything to sneeze at. It's it's a very legitimate emotion rather. Let's examine what it is, what the fear of death is, and how this relates to, let's look at the emotion of embarrassment, for example. You can see that on the tree here. Now, embarrassment is an offshoot of guilt in this particular structure. So guilt is the emotion you feel when you've done something that is, by your own standards and by the standards of the community you're in, part of, something that's considered wrong or taboo or mean-spirited or not friendly, not helpful, any number of violations of your community standards. And if that action is made public, then you feel the embarrassment. You feel shame and embarrassment from that. But why do you feel embarrassed? Why do you feel shame? Why do you feel guilt when you violate community standards? And it goes back directly to fear of death, because evolutionarily speaking, if you are in a community, if you're a pack animal, then the one sure way to end your life early is to be pushed out of the fold, out of the pack. And when you behave in ways that violate the morals and standards of your community, that's a very real potential. If the offense was egregious enough, a very real possibility that you could be ousted from the safety of your community and left to fend for yourself, where you will end up in a bad place, likely killed by the elements or by wild animals. So that makes guilt and embarrassment very useful emotions to have, because it's a catalyst for changed behavior. And let's take a minute to look at another emotion here. Let's look at love. Now, love is by far the most critical emotion to have and to feel. It's not only an avoiding of the fear of death, but it is a very firm stand against the fear of death. It's the only emotion that pushes back with all the vigor and energy of life against this fear of death. And that makes it a unique emotion, and it makes it rare. Okay, I had to adjust the lighting, so because I forgot to turn it on. And okay, so what was I speaking about? It was about love. Love is an exquisitely valuable emotion. As you can see on the chart, we have compassion coming directly from that, and that is a deep desire to see your fellow humans thrive, be lifted out of a condition of suffering. And how it relates to the fear of death is that it is an act of rebellion. It is an act of rebellion against the fear of death. It is a slap in the face, if you will, to the idea that life will someday end. And the other thing that love does in the face of the fear of death is that it, opposite of guilt and embarrassment, it seeks to cement relationships so that you are further enmeshed into your culture and into your society, and there's very little risk of you being excommunicated when you exhibit love, whether it's in an interpersonal relationship or towards your community. That is the best possible scenario for you and your survival. And it takes you, it's the emotion that takes you the farthest from the fear of death. So there are, of course, different ways to align all of these other emotions and to modify how they branch out from the root But one thing is unmistakable, and that is the root of all of our emotions is fear, the fear of death. The interesting thing that I was pondering on this, or that I was thinking about, is if the fear of death was somehow eliminated from our instinct, from our psyches, and this is not something that can be achieved by merely figuring out how to make us live way longer than we normally would, which that is some science that's coming in the near future. They say that the first person who's going to live to be 1,000 years old has already been born. I don't know if I believe that, but that's what people have said. So if instinctively, though, like, I don't think that's going to take away living to be 1,000. It's not going to take away our instinctive fear of death. But I think that if you were to somehow genetically modify our brain chemistry so that we don't have that fear of death, then I wonder what that would do to the rest of our emotional family tree. Would it all come crumbling down? Would it become unnecessary? Because the only reason I would postulate that any of our other emotions exist is because of this fear of death and our seeking to avoid this death. And the other thing is, these emotions necessarily translate into actions. So it could be argued by extension that all of our behaviors that stem from our basic emotions are all derivatives of our fear of death. Anything from being productive at work, building skyscrapers, basic human emotions that involve, building infrastructure and delving into the medical field and learning everything that's possible about the world around us could be construed as avoidance of this fear of death. What other reason is there to understand our universe and to understand the world around us and to learn about how to cure diseases and how to improve lives and improve comfort, inventing air conditioning, cars, airplanes? All of that has to do with improving life to prolong the inevitable. So in a very strange way, we kind of owe our entire civilization and our culture to this fear of death, which is a very strange way to look at it. Now, let's say that everything that I've presented here today is true. I don't know that it is, or I don't know that it isn't. What does that mean for our everyday life? I would say we don't know. I don't know what that would mean. If you have the knowledge that every behavior that you engage in, every relationship, every ideal you have for yourself and for your society, if that is based on the fear of death, how would that change anything if you knew that? I don't think it would. I don't think it would change anything. It's a lot like that paradox where we know that the earth is a sphere, but yet we spend our entire lives behaving as if it's flat because that's our immediate surroundings. Everything looks flat. When we drive, we don't account for the curvature of the earth. We just go straight. Everything else in our life, like we know that the earth is a sphere, but we don't behave as if it's a sphere. So just having that knowledge is just something that you have in the back of your head. And maybe this fundamental emotion of fear is something that we can just know, but it's not really going to change anything in our daily lives. At the very least, this is something just to ponder and maybe mull around in your mind and see if you can find some kind of usefulness for this information. Otherwise, I will probably just leave it there. There's so much more that can be said about this particular chart and the idea of structuring our emotions into a hierarchy like this. In the meantime, that's it for now. So, my name is Charlotte. You're watching The Ugly Atheist. If you like this kind of content, please like and subscribe. And I appreciate you watching. And please leave a comment. And we will see you next Sunday.